Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Welcome to the first workshop of the virtual Albany Book Festival. This workshop is So You're Young and Want to Write with Jackie Orchard and Elaine Salisbury. We're going to be monitoring the chat throughout the workshop. So if you do have questions, please submit them in the chat, and they'll kind of pause at times and take some of those questions. And that's kind of the smoothest way that we're going to do this. You don't have to worry about unmuting or turning off the camera and turning it on. So that'll make things easier. So thank you so much, Jackie and Elaine, for doing this. You can take it away from here.
Awesome. Lainey, do you want to give your experience first?
Sure. So I think I know a lot of the people who are on here, which is great. So some of this might be familiar to you. And I often say this in the classroom too, when I first meet journalism students for the first time. I got into journalism because I didn't know what to do with my life. And it's the perfect, it was sort of the perfect profession for that, because you can be a generalist and you can do anything with this career. And in terms of writing, I think you have to at least want to write if you're going to go into journalism. And I think what first tricked me on to the idea that I could be a writer for a living is when I took a semester abroad to India. And the entire program abroad was basically just write about our experiences. Whenever my American culture bumped up against the Indian culture and there was a miscommunication, I was supposed to detail it and describe it and write it out. And that's when I really discovered how much I enjoyed observing, listening to other people talk, and then capturing it on paper. And then I just wanted to travel a lot too. So I kind of took a roundabout route into the profession. I went abroad before I had any experience, and I started working for a local English paper in Zimbabwe. Did that and then moved on to sort of more formal work with Associated Press. Then went to the headquarters in New York and got what's considered a full-time job. So I kind of went through the back door, which I recommend is a good way to get in. And stayed with the wire services for a good, 10 years. So I was also at Reuters. And then I kind of got a little tired. I always found that I liked feature writing rather than the straight hard news. It's a little bit like riding a bicycle. You can do it really quickly. You can do it in your sleep. But I always felt like I wanted to do something longer. So then I got into writing a book project, and I did well enough on that I could quit my day job, which is what you're never supposed to do. But survived that, and then did another book project, and then I really struggled with the third, and that's how I sort of tumbled into teaching. And I think I'm in a point in my life now where I am starting to go back into another book project because the timing is working out for me. So that brings us up to date.
It's funny, I guess I didn't realize this until you said it just now, but I think the reason that I tumbled into journalism too was because I liked too many different things. I'm too interested in everything that I try, and I guess if you want to be a jack of all trades, journalism is a great way to do that, because every story is like putting on a different pair of shoes. Which is, great if you're never really satisfied and kind of always looking to do the next interesting thing. It's like each week you're a different person almost, which is really great. But I'll go back in time a little bit. I got my first degree in English composition I graduated in 2013. And then I was active duty in the Army. I was an officer for almost 5 years, and got really into like IT and satellite networks and a bunch of really cool like cryptography, radio communications. And that was like accessing a different part of my brain that I figured out that I liked. And then I also had this passion for writing, and I didn't really know how to smush the two together. So I went back to school for journalism, and that's when I figured out just what Lainey did, was that, oh, this is like a way that I can literally try out everything and write about it and talk to people all day long, which if you know me, you know that I really love to talk to people and learn about their stories. So today we're going to focus a little bit on, I guess, the funny moments of becoming a journalist, because we've made so many mistakes, and I think to be a journalist is to be very critical of your own writing and to take a lot of negative feedback and abuse from your editors and your friends and your audience who reads your stuff and writes you emails about how bad it was, or how I don't know, maybe you didn't do enough research, or they just didn't like what you had to say. So there's a lot of humor in becoming a journalist, and we're going to talk about the mistakes that we've made along the way. And especially me, because all of my mistakes happen weekly, daily, because I'm a brand new journalist at WAMC. And so maybe we're going to save you a little bit of pain if you can learn from our experiences today. So I think with that being said, you know a little bit about our backgrounds. Please submit some questions in the chat, and that will kind of steer our conversation. But if not, I'll turn it over to Lainey and just ask, you know, as a professor, what are some of the most common writing mistakes that you see in young writers in your classes?
You know, it really varies. It really varies, but what's the most common? I mean, I think actually, unfortunately, it's basic grammar. I do know, and it's not the fault of the student. I do understand this is not taught all that well and consistently in elementary school and even in high school. I was not taught it. My parents used to complain when I was in the 4th grade that my school wasn't teaching their daughters basic punctuation and grammar. And the theory at the time was, oh, we don't have to waste time doing that because students will absorb it through osmosis by reading, and it'll come naturally. And then 10 years later, they're like, oh, we were wrong, sorry. So, you know, I really had to go out and teach myself grammar and where to put commas and proper punctuation.
But I do think that's a good point to make, though, is that if you want to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. You have to read a lot. And like, some people think that like reading like a book a month is like, oh, I read. That's not reading a lot. You have to read like a lot of articles, a lot of essays, like do your homework assignments, read books, and like there is a little bit of osmosis, I think. Like I learned how to be a better writer by reading better writers, and there's not really any way around that. Do you think?
No, definitely not. Like you can't be a great track star if you don't practice.
Right.
You don't run, or you can't be a great fighter if you don't go and watch the greats fight and see all the moves that they make. But it's also, there's a difference between just reading a lot and then studying what you're reading. I had a friend who was a lawyer and very good at law. He decided he wanted to get into journalism, and he just sat down with a bunch of magazine articles and cracked the code and looked at how they did it. He looked at the sourcing. You know, he was older, so it became a little easier. And he now works for Rolling Stone. I mean, he never took a journalism class in his life, but he studied all the writers who worked for magazines in order to figure it out. And I say that a lot in my reporting and writing 1 class. You know, I can only take a student just so far. We can read the textbook and we can practice, but if they don't go out on their own and, you know, read Associated Press and really look at how it's done, they're not going to actually progress all that much. There's a lot of sweat that you have to do on your own. And I think that's the nature of writing. Writing is sweat. It's hard work. It looks easy, but it's actually quite hard to do it well.
I think that's like a really good segue into what we talked about last night a little bit, which is the editing process, which I never took seriously. Like even my whole first 4 years in college getting an English degree, like I never took editing seriously. Like I would write something and be like, this is good because I'm a good writer and I'm just going to turn it in. And it could have been so much better if I had just asked like my roommate to read it, or like, you know, another friend who's a writer to just read it once. They're going to have some good advice, but it's almost like I was scared to receive criticism because like being a good writer is such a big part of like my identity. And so like I was scared to let somebody else read my work and tell me what was wrong with it because I just want to feel like I'm a good writer. Like I don't want to hear what's wrong with it.
Right.
So I think the sooner you can come to terms with the editing process, the better. Like, would you agree?
Yes, no, your ego, it gets left at the door. I mean, I once had an editor throw a keyboard at me. She was so angry at my copy, and she was also in a bad mood, but it taught me a lesson because I had too many typos in my story. And she was right. That's not her job. Everyone's really busy. She shouldn't be correcting, things, simple mistakes. But even when you can easily get too close to a story, so you have to step away. And
I get like emotionally attached to everything I write. It becomes like a precious child to me, and then I get like Ian calls it being precious about your edits. Like you can't be precious about your work. You have to like slaughter it.
You have to kill your darlings.
Yeah, I can literally kill your darlings. Do you read it out loud when you edit it?
No, I probably should actually. I don't have the patience for that. But I do, when I look at stuff I've written, I do try to pretend that I'm another person.
I pretend, this is so lame. I pretend that I'm like on a stage and I'm like reading, I'm like reading this work to like an audience of people who are just like dying to hear my stupid short story. And then like, as I'm reading it out loud, if I find myself like losing interest in what I'm reading, that's what I cut out. Like,
Good.
If you read it out loud, yeah, as soon as the momentum slows, I'm like, that's gone. Get it out of there.
I think whatever works for a person, that it works. And if it works, it doesn't matter. You do it.
If you want to read to an imaginary audience, you do you.
I think it's like you have to be attached when you're writing, and then you have to detach yourself from the writing and then look at it really objectively.
Yeah, which actually, I mean, this is a digression, but I learned that in my photography class at Albany too. Like you take 100 photos, you only submit 4. So you get really brutal and you're just like, delete, delete, delete. I think it's called like calling by exclusion. And that's like what I do in my writing too. As soon as I'm like, it's not as good, I just cross it out.
Right. Yeah.
Brutal.
It is.
But like, I just want to circle back to the point of like, you shouldn't be submitting anything in your classes or in real life without like at least 2 people looking at it. Like you should write it, know that it's probably trash, have a friend look at it, have a better writer look at it, you look at it again, and then submit it. And that's just like some very preachy advice that I have for everybody.
Well, I think the standard rule is 10th draft.
Yeah.
I mean, even with your friends, where you have to go through it 10 times, rearrange it, look it over, fix it.
Yeah.
Because writing is a process. And even today, I went on a walk with a friend yesterday, and she's working on a book proposal, and I'm working on a book proposal. And I was like, Lisa, I'm just so slow. I put it all down, and then I have to go back, and then I have to add stuff in. And then I realized I forgot this entire aspect to it. And she's like, yeah, but that's the process. You know that by now. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. But we tend to want to everything is so fast today, like Twitter. You can just send out a tweet and be published, and everyone will applaud you for 10 seconds and you've published, So yeah. I think our standards are also changing, and our
attention spans are changing.
And our patience with our own selves, that if you really want to pull off something that's quality, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of thinking and rethinking and a lot of drafts.
Yeah.
And I guess the problem is if you show a draft too early, people start commenting on it and maybe even getting in the way of the creative process. You sort of have to take it to the bitter end on your own before you show it to other people, or other people are going to start confusing you and sending you down paths that maybe you wouldn't have gone if you'd kept it to yourself in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at the chat, and I'm sorry, like things are okay. So I guess I just want to know before we move forward, there's like 21 people on this. Do you guys want to hear more? Should we transition to talking about like careers in writing and like I was recently on the job search before I started working at WAMC, and like I interviewed everything from like a communications specialist to a communications director for like random companies to like journalism to just editor. So do you guys want to hear about job search life? Do you want to hear about writing tips? Do you want to hear about like how to get a book published? So if you could just like put it in the chat.
Well, someone's asking any career advice. Maybe not just journalism if you're trying to find their way in the working world. And I guess, I think journalism, no matter what, is fundamentally tied to any writing job you may or may not get in the future. So I do think, and I'm not here to sell the journalism program, but journalism forces you to write in a way that is compelling and is geared towards specific audiences. And if you can write a basic journalism story, I always argue you can write anything. You can write a PhD paper, you can write a press release, you can write a book. The fundamentals are all in that basic news story that you put together. And, you know, if anyone is serious about even becoming a novelist, we once had a graduate who did become a novelist, and he was in our journalism program. And just making his writing a lot more precise than it was. He kind of honed his skills. And in addition, I think by being a journalism major, you are writing every day. And you're writing in the right kind of way, you know, in which it's meant to be read by an audience, not a professor who's looking at it academically. So I think that's like the first place to start, you know, just you minor in journalism or you major in journalism or you write journalism on your own.
Yeah. And like, I think that's a good segue actually to, if you can write for journalism, you can write anything, and that includes cover letters. And I want to talk about cover letters because I feel like they're the unsung heroes of the job search, and they have snagged me so many interviews. So like a little context, when I was doing the job search, it was like this past December, this last Christmas. And like I graduated from Albany, and within like 2 weeks, I had like 6 interviews lined up. And they hadn't met me, so it wasn't like my sparkling personality, right? Like they only had my resume and a cover letter. And when I'm writing either like essays for grad school or something as important as a cover letter for a job I really want, I sent them to Professor Salisbury. Like I asked for help from Professor Pickus, Professor Bass, like all of my journalism professors gave me different advice, and I needed all of it to get like the jobs that I wanted. So I want to talk about the cover letter because it's like, if you Google cover letter, they're super boring. And a general piece of writing advice is to always entertain yourself first, because it's like, I have good taste, so if this is funny to me, it's gonna be funny to them. And I think that like a funny, humorous cover letter speaks to like your emotional intelligence, the kind of person you would be to work with, the fact that you can write, like you can convey an interesting message that will stay in their brain longer than, you know, a recap of your resume. Who cares? They already have your resume. So like the best advice I can give in the job search is, first of all, you cannot have like a general cover letter that you use to apply to every single job. They're going to see right through that, and it's not going to be specific to the job that you want. So like when I applied to Channel 13 News, that was a different cover letter for TV news than the one I used to apply for WAMC, which is radio news, than the one that I used to apply to be a communications director for a science company. Like you have to go through the job posting, pull out their key phrases, work it in, and then talk about like why you're so special that they have to have you. And you like can't really be humble about it, but you also like need to be memorable. So I just want to say that like spend a lot of time on your cover letter, and you should really only apply to one job a day, because like the entire package that you're submitting to them should be tailored to that job. And if you're just trying to do like 5 applications a night, you're going to end up being lazy and they're all going to be the same. So that's like me on my high horse. Lainey, do you want to like add to that?
No, I mean, I think if you can personalize a cover letter, I mean, and it has to be natural too. So if you're not a comedian or not funny naturally, then be sincere.
Yeah.
Sometimes the seriousness of a cover letter hides that sincerity. Everyone tries to come across as I'm very serious and mature, but you want to try and make sure you're your personality can kind of get in there as well. So it stands out among all the others. But Bailey also, I think, had a question about, specifically how you get a job in the media. And I think this is where, the Albany Student Press really comes into play. Even if you're not a journalism major, that paper is your platform for getting stories that have gone through editors, have been read by an audience. And it's, someone had mentioned as well in the chat, like, what about having a website with your unpublished work up there?
Do it.
Do it. But also I kind of think, and this is not based on any evidence, so I could be wrong, but having a published clip from a newspaper that's been around for 80 years has a lot of cachet. So if you can go to a job search, they're all going to ask for it. If you go to CBS looking for a job, NPR, the first thing they're going to ask you is, do you have any clips? Not, can I go see your work on a website? But do you have published clips? Exactly.
I literally bring this to interviews, and it's like literally a printed newspaper at Albany, and it's like physical clips. That's like pretty rare for, what are you guys going to be, 21 when you graduate? That's dope. You should definitely,
I think people tend to overlook the value of the Albany Student Press. It's a great way to practice, and it's a great way to get editing, and all your mistakes can be taken out on the Albany Student Press. That's where you learn, your mistakes. That will save you later.
Let's, okay, so Sydney wants to know physical clips or an online portfolio. And because I'm all about like being an overachiever, both. The answer is both. Because I've literally sat in an interview before where they said, oh, it's down to you and one other person, but that other person didn't have their own website. Like, they think it's very impressive because the people hiring you are like, sometimes like, over the age of 60. And so like for you to have a personal website, they think that you're like, magical. Like, oh my God, they must be really amazing because look at their website. So definitely do that because it's not expensive and it's not hard to do. And Professor Huber teaches you how to do it on Wix. It takes like, it took me 3 hours to put my website together, and it's really paid dividends. So do that. But on your website, I only put, I think, like my 5 best articles that had like my own photography in the articles. I made sure that like grammatically they were perfect. And then I put them like in your face, look at my work. And then for the physical clips, I bring that with me just because it makes you look more prepared. And they really want somebody who seems like they're going to be on top of it when they hire you. So like I walk in, I bought like some heavy resume paper, which actually people love. So like print your resume on some nice resume paper from Office Max, hand them a copy of the resume, be like, and I brought an extra in case somebody else is coming to the interview. It doesn't matter if they're not, like just show that you thought to have an extra. And then be like, and also here's my portfolio, and then just open it and put it in front of them. And then immediately, like, it breaks the ice. They're like, damn, this girl is really, wow, she is prepared. And then, like, a lot of times the people interviewing me are like, I feel like you're more prepared for this than I am. And then we laugh, and then they, like, offer me a job. So, like, literally do all of the things. Here's Jackie's website. Oh, thanks, Professor Huber. So, yeah, Lainey, back to you.
No, that's it. And I guess in terms of what we put online, I think don't put anything online that is not perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's there for everyone to see. Yeah. And actually, I'll talk about Bailey for a second. When I made my website, I asked Bailey, because she's a photographer, she's way better than I am. I asked her to come do like a friend photo shoot with me. I put on like my best outfit and like grabbed my camera and like my recorder, and I did like fake interviews so that she could photograph me just for my website. And people love that. So it's like grab a friend, go do a professional photo shoot, and like, start thinking about if you were an employer and you saw this as a first impression, would you be like, damn, I want to hire that person? So
definitely. Yep.
Sneaky tips.
Unfortunately, we have to market ourselves. I'm glad I actually didn't have to worry about that coming up through the ranks. I think it's important and it's a lot of work, but it's what's required today to be noticed, because everybody can blog. So how do you stand out?
Yeah, and actually, okay, this is pretty brutal, but when I went for my interview at WAMC, some of you might have had Ian Pickus as a professor, but he was interviewing me, and I had already interned for him. I had been in his class. He knew me, and it was still like a very serious interview. And I handed him my portfolio, and he was flipping through, and he was like, you know, this is really great, but like, this is not the same level as like what we do. And he was basically just like, even with published clips, like, good for you, you worked on the paper, but like in 3 seconds, he found a typo in my clip. And he was like, this cannot happen here. So it's like, and that happened to me, who was like editor-in-chief of, you know, the paper, and like had all these samples of my work already. So it's like, if you don't even have clips to hand somebody, they're going to be like, I don't know anything about you. I don't know how you write. I have nothing to criticize even. You're like,
and plus it's competitive.
It's competitive. Yeah. You have to be like on your shit.
Well, I think most people can write, you know, from a personal perspective, but not everyone can write journalism or evidence-based storytelling. I think that just requires another level of time and commitment.
Yeah.
So again, like the Albany Student Press, that's why it's sort of a perfect platform. You don't have to just do hard news. You can do feature stories and narrative nonfiction, and, you know, show your versatility, you know, over the next 4 years through the newspaper. Doesn't matter whether it's the hard copy or an online version, as long as people can link to it and see it.
Yeah, and we were talking about this yesterday, actually. So like, for the Albany Student Press, I started out only doing features because I think it's important to write about things that interest you as a human being, like as a person. And I didn't know anything about, I didn't even know what a feature was when I came to UAlbany. I just knew that I liked to write. And so when the Albany Student Press, at the time editor-in-chief, Joe asked me like, oh, what do you want to write about? I was like, well, I like musicals and, you know, and like events, and I just like talking to people and like learning about their life experience. And he was like, oh, well, like, you know, why don't you do some features for us? And I just started going to musicals and plays on campus. I started going to like the on-campus museum that most people have never been to, and like just other events like that. And through that experience, I started to learn how to craft a story and how to take something like just a museum. But like, what is it really about? Well, it was really about like the journey of how Black people felt like property through sports, because you could like have your likeness sold to a company without your permission. And so it was actually like a much deeper story than just like go to the on-campus museum.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think don't undervalue the Albany Student Press, because it's a huge opportunity to like find your own journey for what kind of writer you want to be, and also to like bring stories to life that other students would never have even thought about.
But also, you know, this is important for no matter what kind of writer you want to be, but you have to have experiences. You can't be a good writer if you just sit home and just write how you feel and what your thoughts are on certain things. You actually have to go out and talk to people. You know, novelists do this. They go traveling, they go look at the archives, you know, they're out there researching for their novels in order to make it more real. So it's, you know, it's the same thing for students too. I mean, a lot of people often say, oh, I feel shy. But if you can say, I work for a newspaper, you can hide behind a notebook. People are just see you as the Albany Student Press, or they see you as the New York Times. They don't see you as Jackie. And it's a nice sort of shield to hide behind your shyness. And I think it's just very important to get out of your bubble. And to talk to people who are different, or to do things like to go to the museum and not just look at it on a surface level, but to do some prep work before you go, so you can start looking at everyday events a little more deeply and understand what's, you know, beneath the surface. How, you know, look for all those universal human, universal meanings. You know, so many stories and so many events in ordinary people's lives have meaning to other people, because they're going through things that a reader might have gone through or will go through. So there's like a whole world of stories, big and small, out there.
I say that all the time, actually. I say everything is a story. Everything's a story. Like
every person has a story.
Every person has a story, and like it's up to you to just walk up to them and ask them about their life. and then like something amazing will come out of it.
Yeah.
Peyton asked, besides writing for the ASP, what else do you think could benefit a journalism major's resume that they could accomplish while in school? So working.
Nothing, right for the ASP.
That's it. Nothing else.
Albany TV, there's the school TV.
Yeah. Okay, there's two things I want to say about this. One, absolutely everything that you touch, do it 1,000%. Like, I kind of have a reputation for being like, I do a lot. Like, if I do one thing, I'm going to do it all the way 100%, because like that one assignment could be what gets you an interview. Like that one professor who remembers that you were the all-star in their class, they could be interviewing you for your job, which he was. Ian Pickus like hired me. So if I had done a crappy job in his class because I was like, oh, media ethics, who cares? If I blew off one class, I would not have my job. So every single thing that you do is gonna end up being important, especially in small Albany. Everybody knows everybody. Most of these journalism professors work at the local news outlets. So the best advice I can give you is make a good impression, because they're gonna remember.
No, I have a friend who's an editor of USA Today, and he was like, do you know any students who wants an internship? And I was like, yeah, I can name 3. And also the guy who works for Rolling Stone wanted a researcher. Do you know any students who, reliable, trustworthy, who can, help me do my research? And I thought, yeah, this person does, serious. So, I don't know. I don't know the answer is to Peyton's question. What else can you do other than working for the Albany Student Press? I don't know. You really need clips. You need journalistic clips. You could cover a story and not have it published anywhere.
Right.
But the publication of it legitimizes it. It means it stood the test of attack. It's evidence that it actually was publishing quality. So it's kind of hard to get around that idea. If you want a job in journalism, you got to have journalism clips.
Nothing replaces the Albany Student Press, but I would say in addition to, one thing that helped me is like in this day and age, news outlets cannot afford to hire someone to just be their full-time photographer, someone to just go get whatever. You have to be able to do everything. So like it helps a lot that on my resume, it says like, I have my own DSLR camera, I can go to a story, take my own photos, then I can write my own story, and then I can produce my own sound. So the best thing I can say is like, you have to be a one-man show or a one-woman show. You have to know how to do all the aspects of the story. So take a photography class, try to have your own camera. I know it's expensive. I asked for it for Christmas. It was the only gift I got last year. So just think about the whole, and like if you want to do audio journalism, you need to start, maybe try to do the radio program on campus. Like they have their own club too.
And freelance. There's some
Yep.
new organizations cropping up in Albany.
Oh, and here's the other thing. I don't know if I mentioned this. One thing I always told all of my writers on the ASP is you should be recording all your interviews anyway. Because that way you're not like writing furiously while you're interviewing somebody. You can get exact quotes later, transcribe it later, just like record the whole thing on your phone. And then when you go back later to sit down and type it out, it's there for you. You don't have to like remember everything verbatim. So that's just like,
take notes, right? Because if you lose your recording,
it also helps because like sometimes you write things that are true and people don't like it, and then they want to come at you and be like, that's a lie. And you can be like, actually, I recorded the whole thing. So you said it. So that's just like a side tip. What platform do I use for my website? I use Wix, and it's free. And then there's like a little banner on the top that will advertise for Wix. And if you want that gone, I think I paid like $80 for the whole year. And then I actually just re-upped it because so many people I've interviewed with have talked about my website. So it's worth the money. So I continue to pay for it. But it's very easy to do. So highly recommend.
I think somebody wants to know about how to write a book proposal.
That's you.
I think, that was the question. So I think, if you're writing a novel and you want to sell a novel, you have to have the novel fully written before you shop it. If you're doing a nonfiction, You have to do enough research that you can attract an agent. You do need an agent in this business. You should never pay for an agent. The agent earns their bucks by getting a percentage of any book deal you get. The ones who charge you are the unreliable ones, so you definitely want to stay away from that. But I guess what I want to emphasize most is you have to put a lot of grunt work in the beginning of the project before you get any money and before you get even any agent. You should probably research like at least a quarter of the book. And it's a fun process, actually. And then once you attract an agent, then the agent, who usually is an editor, a lot of agents come from the publishing houses like HarperCollins and Random House. They know how to put together a book. They understand, how to market it and what kind of, how to shop it, basically. So they'll ask you to do even more research and to get more of the book concept down on the page. You're going to have to do some interviews to have sample chapters. Example, the first book I did, which I did with my cousin, our proposal was 100 pages. And it was based in Alaska. We hadn't gotten to Alaska, but we did as much research as we could while we were in New York. And we had something like 8 sample chapters, not full, they weren't fully written. We had the big picture of the book, like every story has the subject of the story, and then what's the bigger idea, like what's the big takeaway from the book. So we really thought about that long and hard. It took us about 8 months. But it was worth it because by not speeding through this process, we got a book deal that was, large enough that we both quit our jobs. We were covered for 4 years, and we were earning a salary. So, this grunt work in the beginning is really important and worth it. Usually there's a payoff. Second book, I think my proposal was probably like at 60 pages with sample chapters and the big idea. And even though I've published 2 books, I'm doing the same thing right now. The only thing I have to lose is my personal time, which I'm happy to lose because it's a project I enjoy doing. I find it interesting, and I like talking to these people about what they did, and they seem to enjoy talking. One guy said, "This is so much fun." I'm like, great, because I'm going to be talking to you for 4 years. So they have to sort of be labors of love. You got to be interested in the story. Don't do anything you're not interested in, because you will be living with it for a good 4 years from start to finish.
How do you find an agent?
But I was lucky because my cousin used to work at HarperCollins, and she knew an editor there.
People have cousins at HarperCollins.
Well, now you know one. I can always pass her off to you. But another thing you can do is when you know what kind of book you think you're writing, like is it a science book, is it a novel? You go to Barnes & Noble, or you go to your local bookstore, and every agent is acknowledged in the acknowledgments. And you just take a list of all these agents who have been thanked, and you start from there.
And then you just
then you put your 10 pages together maybe to get an agent's interest, and then you send it, and then you call.
So I guess step 1 is you have to have an idea for you have to have a good idea enough for 10 pages.
No, and you have to do a lot of reporting. And if it's a novel, even just to get an agent, you have to write the novel first. If it's a memoir and you're not published, you have to write the whole memoir, or 3/4 of it.
There it is.
But in a way it's not bad, because, if you enjoy it, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter whether it gets published or not. It's also why, the argument is do not quit your day job, because it is a rough business to make a living. I think, I don't want to say this to disappoint anyone or to pop your bubble, but just to be realistic, I think I read a study once that I think it's like 1% of authors live on the money they earn from writing. Usually they're married to someone who has a full-time job. People who write books particularly in journalism, they tend to be working at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the book is an extension of their reporting. So they too still have a job.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's hard to earn a living, but it's fun no matter what. But I guess I just want to make it clear that people shouldn't just go off and say, oh, I'm going to go write the best American novel. It too is competitive.
And you could end up dying in a van in Alaska in the middle of nowhere. So there's that.
Right. And then come along and then write about that. That's what Howard did.
I want to get to this question from Sydney. It says, how do you both feel about traditional media taking to social media to spread news? I will start with this. So actually, when I was a student at UAlbany, I didn't have social media because I hate it. And you know, it's very superficial. People like your photos, you get like self-worth out of it. It's like a whole thing. Wasn't a fan. Then when I started working at WAMC, I realized that Twitter is like an actual thing. It's like an actual news thing now. And it's mostly journalists, news outlets, and politicians that are on Twitter and the most active. But sometimes that is the best way to reach your audience, which means it's worthwhile. So I have a Twitter. Every time I go to do reporting, like last week there was, you know, the chemical leak, and I was there and I was recording it on my Marantz for like a real audio story that I would produce in a few hours, jotting down a few notes, but then also holding my phone and doing Twitter Live. And then like when I covered the protests, same thing, Twitter Live, Periscope it, because like sometimes your editor back in the newsroom can't wait for you to come back with the machine and give them the sound. Sometimes they need to pull it directly from your Twitter feed. And then the other thing is, if it's happening right now, it's breaking news right now, a lot of people are going to go on Twitter and just try to watch it live. So I will say that for Twitter at least, social media is a legit thing, and if you're a journalist, you need to have a Twitter. The rest, not really. I don't know. Lainey, what do you think?
I mean, I think if you're I'm not in the hard news business, and so I have a Twitter account. I hardly ever use it. When I did the first book, Facebook had just come out, and the publisher said, please set up a Facebook account so you can start marketing the book when it comes out. So it can be a great marketing tool as well. I guess I personally I use it just to read and to organize my reading. If I question how much you need it to really market yourself. If you have a publisher who's marketing it for you, if you're thinking on that level, but it can't hurt. You know, I have a friend who's starting another book project, and I noticed that she's been very quiet on Twitter, but now that she thinks her book is probably going to make it through to the agent, and you know, maybe in a year she will sell it to a publishing, she's starting to show herself on Twitter as an expert in this subject on which the book is about. So she's kind of like gearing up for the time when her book comes out, people can look her up and see, oh, she's an established reporter on this subject, and it just lends to her credibility.
Yeah.
I think
I will say Twitter, okay, so social media, somebody asked on here, like, what are some of the dangers of social media? I will share with you like an embarrassing story. Just remember, I'm a new journalist, so I make a lot of mistakes. But one of the things is...
seasoned journalists make a lot of mistakes on Twitter.
You have to be careful with the social media stuff, because as a good journalist, you're not supposed to have an opinion. And if you have an opinion, it's a secret, and you bury it deep down inside with the rest of your emotions. So like, you can't go on Twitter and be like, yeah, I hate Trump, or conversely, yeah, I love Trump and I can't wait to vote for him, blah, blah, blah. Like, as far as you're concerned as a journalist, this is your professional platform. You're there to bring people news. No one gives a shit about your opinion, so leave it out of there. And like, I made that mistake because like, there is a certain politician that obviously, like, I root for. Like, she's like a strong female. And I put on Twitter one day, like, oh, so-and-so coming with the great answers as always. And like 2 seconds later, my boss was like, take that down. Like, take it down now. You're a journalist. That's not, you have to understand you can't do that. Which was super embarrassing. And I put my tail between my legs. I deleted the tweet, and I will never do it again. So just remember, if you want to be seen as a journalist, you're a journalist all the time. you don't have an opinion publicly anymore. And actually, if you look at the code of ethics for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, for NPR, it says right in there, you're not allowed to like publicly protest. Like, you can attend, but you can't really be like shouting and holding a sign, because that would tell people which way you lean. And hopefully people will assume that you lean no way because your reporting is so objective. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're leading college. If you want to be a journalist, that is your new rule. And I learned this in high school. Somebody came to our school and talked to us about social media, and they said, don't delete, update. You don't have to delete your accounts and not exist. Just go through and update them. Take out the stuff that's embarrassing. Take out the stuff that would point to your political affiliation, and then just start tweeting more like professional things. So that's that. Huber. Okay, so Professor Huber says like some advice on building a network to connect to job opportunities. And then Naika says, on a typical day, how much time do you spend writing? So we have about 10 minutes left. I think on the networking one, I'll just say very quickly that your network is going to come from your professors right now. And UAlbany is actually a great place for that. Like I said, my job at WAMC, like my boss was my professor in school. And if I hadn't used that connection, then it probably would have been somebody that I met through Professor Bass, Professor Salisbury, or yeah, like any of them. That's all you have right now. And they're a great opening. Professor Palmer works at the Times Union, yeah, and they have like a great fellowship program. So Lainey, do you want to add to that? I think this is really important.
No, I mean, it starts in the classroom.
Yeah.
I mean, journalism is very different, I think, from other departments. I think up until about 2 years ago, you didn't need a PhD to teach journalism. A lot of what counted was professional experience, sort of counted for the PhD. So that means that, yeah, a lot of us know people in the industry because we were in the industry. But as we were saying before, I mean, I'm not going to recommend any student who sits in the back and is on their phone. I mean, that would be unfair. Yeah. And I always root for the ones who are just present and trying and reliable. And yeah, I have no problem doing that, and neither do any of my colleagues. So, the journalism classes, there's immediately everything you learn, you just apply. I mean, it's almost like real life. It's the real world in these classrooms, because everything that you do is going to be used, even ethics, even history. History always repeats itself. So you go out and you cover a story and you're like, oh, wow, this is just like, 1898 during the Spanish-American War, same kind of enthusiasm for war and fury and whatnot. So I think it's sort of an oddball educational, it's an oddball major. It's almost like trade school to a degree. I don't really mean that too much, but it's very real world.
I would go as far to say that, like, you won't get a job without networking. Like, I'm smart. I've got a pretty looking resume, but I wouldn't have gotten a job without proving myself in the classroom and networking.
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know if I fully agree, but I think if you have clips and you put yourself out there, that also can get you a job. If people see you publishing, that can also get you a job.
I would say, like, putting yourself out there is networking. Like, you're there, okay, you're talking to people. That's how they get to know you. So
yeah. I think I got my first job that way. So yeah. I'm trying to think.
Naika says, on a typical day, how much time do you spend writing? This answer changed. My job is writing, so I literally write all day long now. But I'm writing different things than I was writing in school. So one thing that I love about the Albany Student Press is there is space in that paper to do long form articles, which is just like such a luxury, such like a lovely thing to just be able to write like a full length feature as long as you want, because they want to fill space typically. As we're now like, oh man, do I really slaughter my babies for WAMC? Like really just chop them right up. So I'm writing like 8 hours a day now, but some of the things I write are only 4 sentences long because they're for newscasts. So And I think I'm a better writer now than I have ever been in my life because I'm doing it every day. Lainey?
If if I'm working on a project, I write. The most important thing to me is I have to be at my computer writing at the exact moment that the caffeine kicks in. So like if I'm not at my computer and the caffeine kicks in, I'm out like walking, I'm out like picking weeds, I start vacuuming. Like it has to just go right from the adrenal system into my fingers, because there are so many other things one can do than sit at a computer and type.
Yeah.
But when I was working on a book project, and even just now, I've really made sure that I get up an hour earlier than I usually do, and I give myself. I mean, I'm working now teaching, so I don't have that much time, but 3 hours. I have to make 3 hours of progress every day, or I'll stall. When I was doing the book, I think I was. I think I only had the energy for like 4 hours of work on it. Some people do 6, but I would just need to get a break and let it all filter out, because when you're writing on something that's 80,000 words, there are structural problems. You have to step back. You have to go back to all your index cards and rearrange chapters and break up chapters, because you have to sort of figure out where the tension is. How do you put in the cliffhangers? And sometimes that requires some distance. But I never took too long away from it, because like all journalistic writing, you have to get to a point where you've memorized your notes. You can't be writing and then stopping and going to folders and looking for a detail. It kind of has to be closer to your fingertips than that. So once you start, you keep going.
And I think I knew I was going to find an opportunity to read this, and I'm going to do it now. But there's this quote that I really want you all to hear, because it's uplifting and it's special and it's important if you want to write anything. And it's from Ira Glass, who created This American Life and also everything amazing that's ever existed. He said, "Nobody tells this to people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me. But all of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's this gap for the first few years that you're making stuff. What you're making isn't very good. It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's just not that good. But your taste, the thing that you got into the game, it's still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. And a lot of people never get past that phase because they quit. But everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through years where they had really good taste and they could tell that what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be." So he goes on to say that the key is to just write a lot, do a lot of work, make a massive body of work. And that's the best thing you can do for yourself, is just keep practicing and keep producing and keep writing. And then eventually your talent is going to catch up with your taste. And like my talent is still catching up to my taste. Like I'm still not happy with a lot of the things that I write. So I just, on a note of like not getting discouraged, everybody feels that way. Like everyone kind of feels like they're not good enough to be called a writer.
I think people feel that, writers feel that way their entire lives.
Yeah, I was worried you would say that. I'm gonna feel this.
But I mean, in a good way. I think you're on dangerous terrain when you think your writing is great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's never easy, but never easy in a challenging way. Writing a story or even a novel, it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You have all these disparate parts, and sometimes you know what the picture is, sometimes you don't, and you start putting all these little pieces together and you try to make a picture out of it, and it's fun. When you're really into it, it's fun. It's not, I've never found, it was only when I was like an editor stuck at a desk at Reuters where I was like, boy, this job, I'm ready to go. But I've never been bored or tired of any story I've ever written. It's always been challenging in a good way. It's always been fun. It's always been exciting. It's a chance to just get into a new set of clothes and meet people you never meet before and try new things,
And I think that's why I say entertain yourself first.
Yeah.
Because I think if you write something and you read it back to yourself and you find yourself feeling bored as you're reading it, that's how everyone else is going to feel when they're reading it. So entertain yourself first, interest yourself first, and then other people who read it will feel the same way you do.
Right.
And so that being said, we have 2 minutes left, and if there's any questions from anyone in the last 2 minutes that we have, please send them in the chat now, and we'll try to get to them before we end. So 2 minutes for final questions. Rapid round. I don't see anything coming through chat.
That's okay. I think
Yeah, this might be the last of them, but I dropped in the chat if anyone is interested in seeing more of the offerings from the virtual Albany Book Festival. You can check out the festival website, albanybookfestival.com. We're going to be posting a new author event every weekday at 1 p.m. On our YouTube channel, and there's a link to the YouTube channel on the Book Festival website. I don't think there's any rapid fire questions coming in.
I don't think so.
But thank you to Jackie and Elaine. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to make the recording, which I'll end in just a minute. I'll send a link so that everyone can access the recording after this officially ends, probably in the next couple of days, because I'm running another one of these later today. But we'll definitely make it available to everyone who signed up for the workshop, and also we're going to be sharing it with some professors to share it as well. But thank you both for taking part in this, and thank you everyone who signed in to participate and take part in this. We really appreciate it. So I think that's it for everybody.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.